At my wife's funeral, I received an envelope hidden under a flower pot. Inside was only a piece of paper that said, "They killed her. Don't trust anyone." That was the moment he knew. His wife's death was not natural, not a stroke, but a conspiracy, and the people behind it could be his own two children. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write a comment telling what time it is where you are. It was the quietest morning I can remember in 72 years of life. Even the seagulls that usually screamed above Millstone Creek were silent, circling once or twice, then vanishing toward the gray horizon. Laura's funeral was held behind the small Methodist church on Elm Street, the same one where we were married 50 years ago. Back then, she wore yellow, said white didn't suit her, and I wore a borrowed suit that smelled faintly of mothballs. Now, half a century later, I stood beside her coffin in the same yard, surrounded by the same pine trees. Only this time I was alone. People from town came out of kindness more than closeness. Former students, a few neighbors, the church choir ladies. My sons stood on opposite sides of me like polite strangers. Daniel, the eldest, in his polished navy suit, checking his watch every few minutes, as if he had somewhere more important to be. Peter, the younger one, looked smaller than usual, his shoulders drawn inward, but his eyes never quite met mine. I should have felt comfort having them beside me, but what I felt instead was distance, like there was a sheet of glass between us. When the pastor began his prayer, I looked down at Laura's coffin, mahogany, simple, the kind she would have chosen, and I tried to remember her laugh, that bright melodic laugh that could lift a bad day out of its gloom, but I couldn't hear it anymore. Just the wind and the faint clink of Daniel's cufflinks as he crossed his arms. After the service, people came to offer their condolences, the same phrases, repeated softly, like a worn-out hymn. "She's in a better place. You two were such a beautiful couple. She adored you, Edward." I nodded, smiled, said thank you, though none of it registered. My mind was fixed on something smaller, stranger, a white envelope tucked halfway under the flower arrangement at the base of the coffin. No one else seemed to notice it. It wasn't there earlier when the church ladies set up the flowers. I bent slightly, my knees protesting as they always did, and slid the envelope into my coat pocket. I didn't open it until hours later, after everyone had left. That afternoon, the house felt foreign. Laura's cardigan was still hanging on the back of her chair. Her glasses rested beside the half-finished crossword on the kitchen table. I sat down, the smell of her lavender soap still clinging to the air, and pulled out the envelope. No name. No return address. Just my initials, E.M., written in thin, slanted handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. 7 words, written in black ink. "They killed her. Don't trust Daniel or Peter." The pen dropped from my hand. For a full minute, I couldn't breathe. At first, I thought it was some cruel prank, maybe a mistake, someone else's envelope. But the handwriting, I'd seen it before. It was Laura's. My Laura, who died a week ago from what the doctors called a sudden heart failure. I read the note again, my hands trembling. The signature at the bottom, just a small L, written the way she always signed grocery lists or love notes she left me on the fridge. It was hers, no doubt about it. But how? She couldn't have written it after she died. And if she'd written it before, how did it end up under the flowers at her own funeral? That evening, Daniel stopped by. He didn't knock. He never did. Just came in like the house already belonged to him. "Dad," he said, loosening his tie, "we need to talk about arrangements. The insurance, the house, the things Mom left unfinished." His tone was efficient, almost businesslike. Laura had been gone less than a week, and he was already talking about paperwork. "Not tonight," I said quietly. "Please." Peter stood behind him, avoiding my eyes, holding 2 cups of coffee he'd picked up from the diner. "You should drink something, Dad. You look pale." I forced a smile, thanked him, but my eyes were fixed on the envelope lying face down on the kitchen table. If they noticed, they didn't say anything. Daniel talked for another 10 minutes about real estate values, assisted living facilities, financial transitions. The kind of talk that fills space when empathy is absent. I nodded, gave him short answers, waited for them to leave. When the front door finally shut, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. I turned the envelope over again, touched the edge of the paper. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, jasmine and cedarwood. There was no mistaking it now. Laura had left me a message, and she had done it knowing someone would try to stop her. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the letter in one hand, her old wedding ring in the other. Memories came in waves. The first house we bought together, the nights grading papers at the kitchen table, her humming while cooking, the way she'd touch my arm when she wanted me to stop worrying. Then, another memory surfaced, something I hadn't thought about until that moment. 3 weeks before she died, Laura had told me she was feeling strange, dizzy spells, heart flutters. I told her to see Dr. Wallace, but she said Daniel had already scheduled an appointment for her in the city, with a specialist he knew. I didn't question it. Why would I? He was our son. Now the note made those memories twist into something dark. Had Daniel? No, that was impossible. My son might be ambitious, selfish even, but he wasn't. The thought stopped there, unfinished, too monstrous to complete. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old shutters. I sat there until nearly dawn, the note lying open on the coffee table, staring back at me like an accusation. When the first light of morning crept through the curtains, I whispered out loud. To her, to the empty room, to the ghosts of my life. I don't know what you meant, Laura, but I'll find out. That was 5 years ago, and what I discovered in the months that followed would change everything I believed about family, love, and the price of silence. But it all began that morning, with a coffin, a handful of lilies, and 7 words written in my wife's hand. People talk about betrayal as if it happens in one sharp moment. A door slammed, a cruel sentence spoken. But in truth, it creeps in quietly, like water seeping through old wood. You don't see the rot until one day the whole house gives way. For me, the first crack came a week after Laura's funeral. Daniel called to say he'd handled everything with the lawyer. "All you need to do is sign a few papers, Dad," he said. Mom wanted things to be simple. Simple. That word echoed in my mind as he placed the documents on the kitchen table. The same table where Laura and I had shared breakfast for 40 years. There were 4 envelopes, neatly labeled: power of attorney, estate transfer, property reassignment, medical proxy. I read the titles, but my mind was still foggy from grief. Daniel slid a pen toward me, smiling the way salesmen do when the deal is already sealed. You trust me, don't you? I hesitated. Something in his voice sounded rehearsed. Where's the original will? I asked. He exchanged a glance with Peter. It's being updated, Daniel said. Mom wanted us to handle the details for you. She knew you'd be too emotional. Too emotional? The words tasted bitter. Peter fidgeted beside the sink. Dad, it's just paperwork. Dan's got everything under control. I looked at my sons, men in their 40s, both taller than I ever was, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see boys who needed my guidance. I saw strangers who wanted something from me. Still, I signed nothing that day. Old habits from teaching history, I suppose. Always check your sources. That night, I opened the file cabinet in Laura's sewing room. She'd kept every important paper neatly labeled in her own handwriting. Mortgage, insurance, pension. I found her will in the back, dated 2 years earlier. Her signature was steady, confident. It left everything, the house, the small savings, her teacher's pension, to me. Only after my death would it pass to Daniel and Peter equally. But the copy Daniel had shown me was different. His version made him the sole executor, with discretionary power to allocate resources for the well-being of the surviving parent. A polite way of saying, control everything. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice small changes. The bank statement stopped arriving by mail. Peter had switched everything to paperless for convenience. A real estate agent came by to check the value of the property, saying Daniel had arranged it. And one morning, I found a brochure for Millstone Senior Residence slipped under my door. Independent living with dignity, it said. I remember laughing. A sharp, humorless sound. That's what people say when they want to get rid of you politely. Then came the insurance letter. Laura's life insurance claim had been processed, but the beneficiary name had changed a month before her death. Instead of me, it listed Daniel Mallory and Peter Mallory, joint beneficiaries. I stared at that line until the words blurred. Laura would never have done that willingly. She'd once told me, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll use the money to travel. See the world you never had time to see. She'd even circled a cruise brochure and tucked it in the kitchen drawer. Now her final gift had been rewritten into a business transaction. I confronted Daniel the following Sunday. He arrived in his silver SUV, talking on his phone as usual. When he finally hung up, I handed him the insurance letter. What is this? I asked. He didn't flinch. Exactly what it says. Mom updated the policy. She wanted to make sure the money went where it'd be best managed. Managed by you, I said. He smiled, a small, practiced curve of the lips. You're not young anymore, Dad. Finances can get confusing. We just want to help. Help? I said quietly. By taking what's mine. Peter shifted uneasily. Don't make it sound like that. We're trying to protect you. From what? My own life? No one spoke. The only sound was the wind chime Laura had hung outside, tinkling between us. Daniel finally said, "We'll talk again once you've rested." And just like that, they left, my sons, walking down the porch steps of the house they'd been raised in, leaving behind the faint scent of betrayal. That night, I went into Laura's room again. Her sweater was still draped over the chair, a strand of her silver hair clinging to the collar. I sat there until midnight, thinking about every small kindness, every sacrifice we'd made for those boys. How many nights had she stayed up sewing costumes for school plays? How many birthdays had we skipped dinners out because Daniel needed new football cleats, because Peter wanted music lessons? We had given them everything, and now they were dismantling the life we built, piece by piece, signature by signature. I picked up Laura's framed photo from the dresser. She was smiling, her eyes full of quiet intelligence. "What did you know?" I whispered. "What did they do to you?" The note from the funeral lay folded in my pocket. "They killed her. Don't trust Daniel or Peter." At first I'd dismissed it as grief talking from beyond the grave, but now every word pulsed with dreadful possibility. 2 days later, Mrs. Carter, our neighbor, came by with a casserole. She hesitated before speaking. "Edward, did you know your boys were at the pharmacy with Laura the day before she passed?" I set down the dish. "Both of them?" She nodded. "I saw them waiting in the car. Laura looked nervous. She told me Daniel had found a new doctor in Portland." My stomach turned. That was the same week Laura started feeling dizzy, the week she said she was on new vitamins. I thanked Mrs. Carter and closed the door slowly, my mind racing. If Daniel and Peter had arranged her appointments, handled her prescriptions, changed the insurance, and now wanted me declared incompetent, then Laura's note wasn't paranoia. It was a warning. That night, as the rain tapped against the windows, I sat at the kitchen table staring at their forged documents, the insurance letter, the funeral note. Every instinct I had as a father screamed no, not my son's, but the evidence whispered yes, yours and no one else's. In that moment, grief gave way to something colder, resolve. I decided that before I accused them, I would gather proof, real, undeniable proof, because the next time I looked my sons in the eye, I wanted the truth to stand between us like judgment itself. There's a sound old houses make after midnight. Not quite silence, not quite noise. Wood expanding, pipes sighing, wind pressing against the eaves. For 50 years it had comforted me. That night, it kept me awake. I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking loud enough to feel in my chest. The papers Daniel had shoved under my nose were spread out before me, next to Laura's funeral note. Every few minutes I told myself I was imagining things, that grief was turning shadows into shapes. But the shadows wouldn't sit still. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and wandered into Laura's sewing room. It still smelled of fabric softener and peppermint oil. Her reading lamp was exactly as she'd left it. The light bulb burnt out weeks before she died. On the desk lay a small Bible, its leather cover worn thin from years of her morning devotions. When I opened it, something clinked against the table. A silver flash of metal. A thumb drive, taped inside the back cover. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then I plugged it into the old laptop she used for school reports. The screen came alive, blue light cutting across the dark room. Inside were 3 files, dated the week before she died. Each one named simply Home Audio 1, Home Audio 2, Doctor. My heart thudded as I clicked the first. Her voice filled the speakers, soft, uncertain. "This is Laura Mallory. If something happens to me, please give this to Edward. I think Daniel and Peter are hiding things from us." I froze. They told me not to bother with my regular doctor, that they'd found someone better. But this new physician, he never looked me in the eye. The pills he prescribed make me dizzy. Daniel insists they're vitamins. There was a rustle, the sound of papers being folded. He said it's a trial supplement. I looked it up. It's a heart medication. Then silence. I clicked the second file. Daniel brought me tea tonight. Said it would help me sleep. It tasted strange, metallic. I poured most of it down the drain when he wasn't looking. I'm keeping what's left in a jar, just in case. Her breathing quickened on the recording. If I'm wrong, forgive me, but if I'm right, Edward, don't let them talk you into anything. Promise me. The file ended with a faint click of the recorder being shut off. I sat back, the chair creaking beneath me. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. I wanted to cry, but there was no room left for tears. Only the cold clarity that comes when denial finally gives up. The third file was the hardest to open. It was labeled Doctor. A man's voice began, low and muffled. Increase the dosage slightly. She'll sleep deeper, fewer complaints. Then Daniel's voice, steady, polite. Will it show up on tests? Not unless someone's looking for it. I stopped the playback and sat in the dark until dawn. The first birds began to call outside, oblivious to the storm gathering inside my chest. At sunrise, I carried the laptop to the porch and watched the light crawl over the pines. For half a century, I had trusted that the world, at its core, was decent. That evil wore a face you could recognize. Now I knew better. Sometimes evil wears your own son's smile. The note at the funeral, the insurance change, the forged will, they weren't coincidences. They were chapters in a plan. I spent the rest of the day searching every inch of the house. In Laura's dresser, I found a folded bank statement, marked in her handwriting, check withdrawals. The numbers matched Daniel's recent transfers. She had been following the money, documenting everything. By afternoon, I had a stack of evidence spread across the table. Recordings, letters, statements. Proof that Laura had uncovered her son's deceit and paid for it with her life. That evening, Peter called. He sounded nervous, forced. "Dad, you doing okay? You've been quiet." "I'm fine," I said. "Just organizing some of your mother's things." "Don't overdo it," he said quickly. "Dan thinks you should let us handle the bills. Maybe come stay with me for a while." "I'll think about it," I lied. When we hung up, I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. They were worried, not about me, but about what I might have found. I drove into town the next morning to the old library where Rebecca Collins worked part-time. We'd taught together years ago before she became a reporter for the county paper. Her hair was gray now, but her eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. "Edward Mallory," she said, surprised. "It's been ages." I handed her the USB drive. "I need you to listen to something, and I need you to tell me if I'm losing my mind." We sat in a small study room, headphones split between us. When the recordings ended, she didn't speak right away. She just removed the headphones slowly, eyes fixed on the table. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Hidden in Laura's Bible." Rebecca exhaled. "Edward, this isn't grief talking. This is evidence. And if what I think is true, your wife was murdered." I nodded, my throat tight. Then I have to finish what she started. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done since the day Laura died. October 17th. Laura, my love, you were right. They've taken everything from us, but not my mind. I'll keep it steady. I'll find the truth. You once said justice is just love corrected. I think I understand now. When I closed the journal, I felt something I hadn't felt since the funeral. Purpose. Not anger yet, not revenge. Just the quiet determination of a man who has nothing left to lose. The morning after Rebecca heard the recordings, the air outside smelled of rain and salt. Millstone Creek was half covered in fog, the kind that softens everything it touches. Fences, roofs, even memory. I sat on the porch, Laura's old shawl draped over my shoulders, listening to the distant hum of cars heading toward the highway. I'd lived 72 years believing decency could mend anything. But decency doesn't stop poison from slipping into a teacup. Rebecca arrived just after 8, a notebook tucked under her arm. She was dressed the same way she used to come to school. No nonsense, pencil behind her ear. "Edward," she said, taking a seat beside me. "I spoke to an old contact in Portland. If we can get that pill bottle your wife mentioned, they can test it for contaminants." I nodded. "It's still in the kitchen. Laura kept it in a mason jar behind the flour tin. I hadn't touched it since she died." Rebecca followed me inside. The jar was right where she'd said, half full, a faint metallic smell when I opened it. Rebecca sealed it in a plastic evidence bag. "If this comes back positive, we'll have a case, but you need to be careful. They can't know you're on to them." "I was a teacher for 40 years, I said. "I know how to let people talk until they tell on themselves." That afternoon, I called Daniel. "Come for dinner tomorrow," I said. "Just us. I want to talk about the future." He sounded relieved, maybe even triumphant. "Finally, I'll bring Peter." "Good," I said. "Bring your appetite." After I hung up, Rebecca and I set up an old voice recorder under the kitchen table, another in the living room clock, just like Laura had done. This time, the house itself would be a witness. The next day crawled by. I went through the motions, grocery shopping, mowing the patchy lawn, but everything felt staged, like I was rehearsing a role in someone else's play. By 6 o'clock, the smell of roasted chicken filled the house. It was Laura's recipe: thyme, lemon, and a touch of honey. I wanted the evening to feel familiar, disarming. Evil relaxes when it believes it's already won. At 7 sharp, Daniel's SUV rolled up the drive. Peter climbed out first, carrying a bottle of wine. "Figured we could toast to Mom," he said. "That's thoughtful," I replied. "Come in." We ate in near silence, the way families do when affection has run out, but habit remains. Daniel dominated the conversation. Market trends, new business ventures, his plans for modernizing the old house. Peter mostly nodded. When the plates were cleared, Daniel leaned back, casual. "Dad, we've been talking. It's time to make some decisions. You can't keep this place up alone." "I manage fine." "Sure," he said, smiling. "But accidents happen. You're not as steady as you used to be." The line was so close to the one from the recordings that for a second I forgot to breathe. I poured them both coffee, just as I'd done every Sunday for years. They accepted the cups without hesitation. My hands didn't shake, though my pulse hammered behind my eyes. "You're right," I said quietly. "I've been thinking about the future, too." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Really?" "Yes. I want to simplify things." I slid an envelope across the table. "Some papers I've been working on. Look them over tonight." He took the bait, tucking the envelope into his briefcase without opening it. Inside were copies of Laura's recordings, duplicates, labeled as household inventories. By the time he discovered what they really were, they'd already be on Rebecca's desk. Peter looked uneasy. "Dad, you sure you're okay? You've been acting different." I smiled, just tired of old routines. They stayed another half hour, talking logistics, completely unaware that every word was being recorded. When they left, I stood on the porch and watched their taillights fade into the mist. For the first time in months, I felt control shift, just a little, back toward me. Rebecca called the next morning. "I dropped the tea sample at the lab. Should have results within 48 hours. In the meantime, you need someone official, a witness." "Mark Dalton," I said. "You remember him? He was my student once." She laughed softly. "The sheriff? Perfect." I phoned him that afternoon. "Mark, it's Edward Mallory. I need a word. About something serious." He came by that evening, his uniform damp from the drizzle. We sat in the living room, the old clock ticking between us. When I finished explaining, he was silent for a long while. Finally, he said, "If what you're telling me is true, we'll need physical evidence and a statement. Do you have recordings?" I nodded. 2 sets, one from Laura, one from last night. He rubbed his chin. "Keep pretending nothing's wrong. Let them think you're slipping. People that confident always overreach. When they do, we'll be ready." The next few days felt like living inside a storm you couldn't see. The lab confirmed what Laura had feared: traces of digitalis, a heart medication that in the wrong dose becomes lethal. Rebecca and I met Mark at the station. He photographed the jar, took the official report, and secured the recordings. "Give them room," he said. "Let them make the next move." That night, Daniel called again. "Dad, how have you been sleeping?" he asked. "Fine," I lied. He chuckled. "You always were a bad liar." For the first time, I heard something beneath his voice. Not concern, not warmth, calculation. He told me he'd stop by Saturday morning with something to help me rest. I thanked him and hung up. As soon as I set the phone down, I whispered to the empty kitchen, "You'll bring it right to me, won't you, son?" Saturday dawned cold and clear. Rebecca and Sheriff Dalton were parked 2 houses down, watching through binoculars. I kept the door unlocked, the house quiet. At 9 o'clock, Daniel arrived with a small white bottle. He smiled as he poured a glass of orange juice, dissolving a tablet inside. "Just a mild sedative," he said. "You'll sleep like a baby." I took the glass, raised it as though to sip, and stopped halfway. "Funny thing," I said. "Your mother used to make me tea when I couldn't sleep. It never killed me." His smile froze. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, the front door opened and Sheriff Dalton stepped in. "Mr. Mallory," he said evenly, "I think we'll take that glass." Daniel turned pale. Behind him, Peter stood speechless in the doorway, caught mid-step. The sheriff lifted the bottle from Daniel's hand with gloved fingers. Rebecca followed, camera recording. I looked at my sons, my own flesh and blood, and said, very quietly, "I taught you both that truth always finds its way out. Looks like you weren't listening." When the sheriff left that morning with Daniel and Peter in separate patrol cars, I stood at the window until the red lights disappeared down Millstone Road. The house went completely still. You'd think I'd feel relief, but what I felt was something quieter, deeper. The slow return of gravity after months of floating in disbelief. Rebecca came in from the porch. "You okay, Edward?" "I will be," I said, "but it's not over yet." She nodded, setting her recorder on the counter. Then let's make sure it ends the right way. Sheriff Dalton's investigation moved quickly. He'd been in my classroom 30 years ago, a quiet boy who used to linger after history lessons, asking about justice and courage. Now he was a man who embodied both. He called me that evening. "We sent the sample from the orange juice to the lab," he said. "Same compound that was in your wife's tea. Digitalis, high concentration. You were one swallow away." There was a pause. "Edward," he added, "you did the right thing calling us when you did." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the dark a while. Outside, the rain began to fall again. Steady, cleansing. For months, I'd been surviving minute by minute. Now I wanted the truth to move forward without me forcing it. I wanted to see it walk on its own legs. 2 days later, Dalton invited me to the station. Rebecca came with me, notebook in hand. He laid out a folder on the table. Photos, transcripts, lab reports. "The evidence is solid," he said. "Between the recordings, the toxicology, and your son's fingerprints on the tea bottle, it's airtight." I stared at the photographs. Daniel's polished shoes under the interrogation table. Peter's pale hands trembling around a paper cup. They looked smaller than I remembered, like boys caught stealing from a corner store, not men who'd poisoned their mother. Dalton turned another page. "When we searched Daniel's office, we found financial records, debts, unpaid loans, even messages from someone named R. Collins. You know the name?" Rebecca shook her head. "Not me." Dalton frowned. "Different Collins, then. A loan shark out of Portland." The picture came together in my mind. Desperate men, drowning in debt, deciding that the easiest life insurance was a parent's. Not monsters. Cowards. Somehow that was worse. The local paper broke the story within 48 hours. 2 brothers arrested in alleged poisoning of mother, attempt on father. Millstone Creek had never seen a headline like that. Neighbors stopped by, some with sympathy, others just curiosity. I accepted both with the same polite nod. Pity, I learned, is easier to bear than suspicion. Rebecca handled the press. "You're not ready for microphones yet," she told me, and she was right. I wasn't angry anymore, just hollow. But while the police worked, I worked too. There were still practical things to do. I had to secure Laura's recordings in legal custody, settle the estate, and ensure that no lawyer could twist my son's crimes into misunderstandings. I spent nights writing statements, dates, cross-referencing every transaction Laura had tracked. Years of teaching teenagers had made me meticulous, and patience, I realized, could be a weapon too. One evening, Dalton called again. "They're both claiming you forged the evidence, he said, that you're framing them." I laughed softly. "That sounds like Daniel." "Don't worry, we've got enough to hold them. But if you're up for it, I'd like to record a formal statement tomorrow, on camera." "I'll be there." After we hung up, Rebecca poured us both coffee. "You know," she said, "most people would have lost their minds by now. You haven't even raised your voice." "What good would that do?" I said. "The truth doesn't need shouting, it just needs to breathe." The next day, at the station, they set up the camera in a plain gray room. I sat in front of it, hands folded. Dalton asked, "Mr. Mallory, can you describe your intentions toward your sons?" I looked straight into the lens. "My intention," I said slowly, "is justice, not revenge. They were my children once, but they took something that can't be returned. Not just a life, but the trust that gives life meaning. I don't want them hurt. I want them to face what they've done." The room stayed quiet. Dalton turned off the camera. Rebecca whispered, "Laura would have been proud." I smiled faintly. She taught me half of what I know about courage. A week later, Dalton came by the house again, hat in hand. The DAs filed charges: first-degree murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, forgery. Trials in 6 weeks. He hesitated. "They're asking if you'll testify." I thought for a long time before answering. "I will," I said finally. "But I'll do it my way." He nodded, not pressing. That night I walked out to Laura's garden, where the first crocuses were pushing through the soil. The air was cold enough to sting, but I stayed until the stars came out. I spoke to her softly, like I used to after long days at school. "I didn't let them win, love. You were right. The truth was here all along. We just had to open the window." Then, almost without thinking, I went back inside and began writing a letter. It was to Daniel and Peter. I told them I'd testify. I told them the evidence was overwhelming. But I also told them something else. "You may have killed your mother, but you will not kill what she stood for. Every act of kindness she ever did will outlive your cruelty, and that will be your sentence long before the judge speaks." I sealed the envelope, addressed it to the county jail, and left it by the door for the morning mail. 3 days later, the lab sent one final report. Digitalis in Laura's blood. Traces of the same compound on Daniel's kitchen counter. A fingerprint match on the altered insurance documents. Dalton called it closure. I called it confirmation. Rebecca and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the last light fade over the creek. She asked quietly, "Do you ever wish you hadn't found out?" I thought about that. About ignorance, about the comfort of not knowing. Then I shook my head. "No, knowing hurts, but it's clean. Not knowing, that's a wound that never closes." She nodded. "What will you do now?" I looked toward the horizon, where the sky was turning the same pale gold Laura used to love. "I'll teach one more lesson," I said. "But this time it's not for students. It's for the town, maybe even for them." When the trial date was set, I sent Rebecca one last file, my statement to be read aloud in court in case I couldn't. It began simply. "My name is Edward Mallory. I am 72 years old. I've learned that dignity doesn't come from being untouched by evil. It comes from standing up to it, even when it shares your last name." The courthouse in Portland had seen its share of grim stories, robberies, feuds, the usual small-town tragedies, but nothing like this. When I walked through its doors that first morning of the trial, people went silent. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked wool coats. Reporters whispered my name, pens poised above notepads. I'd worn my best gray suit, the one Laura gave me for our 50th anniversary. It no longer fit as well, but I kept it pressed. Dignity, I'd learned, begins with small things. Rebecca met me at the entrance. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." She nodded toward the courtroom. "They're already seated." Daniel and Peter sat at the defense table, side by side but miles apart. Daniel's hair was slicked back, his face pale but composed. Peter's eyes darted everywhere, as if the walls themselves might accuse him. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I stood too, the weight of 72 years balanced on my spine. The prosecutor began methodically, playing the recordings Laura had left, then the ones from my dinner with the boys. Each word echoed through the room like hammer strikes. "Just a mild sedative," Daniel's voice said. "You'll sleep like a baby." I watched the jurors flinch. Then came the toxicology reports, the bank statements, the altered will. Rebecca's meticulous notes had tied every thread together until there was nowhere for them to hide. When the prosecutor finished, she turned toward me. "Mr. Mallory, please take the stand." The bailiff helped me to the witness chair. My knees ached, but my voice held steady. "Mr. Mallory," the prosecutor asked, "why are you here today?" "To tell the truth," I said, "and to keep a promise to my wife." She let that settle before asking, "Can you describe your relationship with your sons before your wife's death?" I took a slow breath. "We were a family once. Ordinary, happy, poor but proud. My wife and I worked hard so they'd never have to. Maybe that was our mistake. We gave them everything except gratitude." Daniel looked down. Peter blinked rapidly, his lips trembling. The defense lawyer tried to interrupt. "Objection. Irrelevant emotion." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled. Let him speak." Continued. "When Laura got sick, I trusted them. I believed love was protection enough. But love, without truth, can become a blindfold. They took advantage of that blindness." The prosecutor asked about the recordings, about the tea, about the night Sheriff Dalton intervened. I answered each question plainly, without drama. The truth didn't need embellishment. It carried its own weight. When she was done, the defense had its turn. "Mr. Mallory," the defense attorney said, stepping closer, "isn't it possible that grief has colored your memory? That your wife's passing and your age—" I cut him off gently. "Son, I may be old, but I'm not confused. I taught history for 40 years. I remember every date, every voice, every betrayal, especially the ones that come from your own blood." The courtroom went quiet. Even the judge looked down, pen still. The trial lasted 8 days. Each morning I sat in the same seat, back straight, hands folded, while witnesses spoke. Lab technicians, the pharmacist, even Mrs. Carter, who'd seen Laura with the boys at the pharmacy. By the time the prosecutor gave her closing argument, the story was complete. "Two men chose greed over love," she said. "They believed age makes a person disposable, but their father proved that wisdom is not weakness." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, I could hear the sound of paper shuffling, a cough, the faint hum of the ceiling fan. "On the charge of first-degree murder of Laura Mallory," the foreman said, "we find the defendants guilty." Daniel's shoulders slumped. Peter began to cry quietly. "On the charge of attempted murder of Edward Mallory, we find the defendants guilty." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, not from satisfaction, but from the release of a long, terrible tension. The judge cleared his throat. "For the murder of Laura Mallory and the attempted murder of Edward Mallory, this court sentences Daniel and Peter Mallory to life imprisonment, with eligibility for parole after 30 years. A sound left my chest, half sigh, half prayer. Reporters swarmed as I stepped outside. Microphones flashed like lightning. "Mr. Mallory, do you have anything to say?" one shouted. I stopped, looked at the crowd, and spoke softly enough that they had to lean in. "Justice doesn't erase pain," I said. "It just stops the bleeding." Then I walked away. Rebecca caught up with me near the steps. "You handled that with grace." "I just told the truth," I said. "The rest took care of itself." We drove back to Millstone Creek in silence. The town looked smaller somehow, the streets familiar but hollow. When she dropped me at the house, she hesitated. "What will you do now?" "Live," I said simply, "and remember." I poured 2 cups of coffee, one for me and one for Laura, as I used to. Her cup stayed steaming beside her photograph. "You were right," I whispered. The truth did find its way. Outside, the rain stopped. The wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of the sea through the open window. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not victory, just peace. Before bed, I wrote one last entry in my journal. Justice arrived today. It came quietly, without triumph, the way morning light enters a dark room. I am not a hero. I am just a husband who kept his promise. I closed the book and turned off the lamp. Somewhere in the darkness, I could almost hear her laugh again. Soft, forgiving, carried on the wind. It's been 5 years since that trial. I'm 77 now, and mornings come slower, but they come with peace. The house on Millstone Creek still creaks in the same places, though the silence doesn't hurt the way it used to. When Laura was alive, she used to say, "The heart's like a classroom, Ed. You never stop learning, not even from pain." I think I finally understand what she meant. Laura's old flower bed has grown into something of a sanctuary. Rebecca and I planted roses there last spring. Yellow ones, her favorite. Every morning I water them, talk to them the way old men talk to things that no longer answer back. Neighbors stop by sometimes. They still lower their voices when they speak of what happened. But I don't mind. The story's not shame to me anymore. It's history. And history, when told truthfully, stops repeating itself. A year after the verdict, Rebecca convinced me to use what was left of the insurance settlement to start something we called the Laura Mallory Trust. It helps elderly folks who've been scammed or mistreated by their families, people who, like me, discovered that love can be used as a weapon. Every month, letters arrive from all over Maine. A widow whose nephew emptied her bank account. A veteran whose daughter forged his pension checks. I read each one slowly, sign every check personally. I tell them, "You're not alone. You still matter." And in some small way, it feels like Laura's still teaching through me. Her lesson this time written not on a chalkboard, but in the lives we managed to repair. Rebecca visits every Wednesday, just like she used to during those terrible months. We sit on the porch with coffee and talk about her grandchildren, the town gossip, the newspaper's dwindling readership. Sometimes we fall into silence, the comfortable kind that only old friends can share. People ask if there's something more between us. The truth is simpler. She was the hand that pulled me back from the edge, and I've learned that companionship doesn't always need romance to be sacred. I get letters from the prison twice a year. Peter writes long ones. Pages of apologies, prayers, regrets that circle back on themselves. Daniel writes shorter, colder notes. The last one just said, "I finally understand what we destroyed." I write back to both of them, always the same line. Understanding is the beginning. Forgiveness takes longer. People think forgiveness means forgetting. It doesn't. Forgiveness is remembering without letting the memory own you. I still visit them once a year, usually in spring. They look older now, beaten down not by the sentence, but by the truth that there's no undoing what's been done. Each time I leave, I tell them the same thing. Your mother loved you more than you'll ever know. Honor that love, even here. It's the only sermon I have left to give. Sometimes local schools invite me to speak, the retired teacher who survived the unthinkable. I always tell the students the same thing. Evil doesn't always come wearing a mask. Sometimes it comes wearing a family name, a familiar smile. But that doesn't mean goodness disappears. It just waits for courage to call its name. When I say those words, I see heads nodding, some in understanding, some in fear. And I know Laura would be proud. Not because I'm brave, but because I kept believing that decency still has a place in this world. On the 5th anniversary of her death, we held a small ceremony by the creek. Rebecca, Sheriff Dalton, a few neighbors, and those we've helped through the trust came. We planted a new oak tree, its roots reaching into the soil where we buried part of Laura's ashes. When it was my turn to speak, I said, "This tree will outlive all of us. That's what love should do. Outlast the harm, outgrow the pain." As the wind moved through the branches, I swear I could feel her there, not as a ghost, but as peace itself, the kind that doesn't need proof. Now, each evening, I sit on the porch as the sun slips behind the pines. The sky turns that deep gold she used to love, and I hold her old mug of coffee in both hands, warming what time hasn't taken. People sometimes ask if I regret uncovering the truth. I tell them no, because truth, even when it breaks you, builds something stronger after. If you were to walk by the house at dusk, you'd probably see an old man in a cardigan staring at the horizon. You might think he's lonely, but you'd be wrong. He's simply remembering. When you reach my age, Pam, I'd tell anyone willing to listen, you learn that justice isn't revenge, and forgiveness isn't weakness. They're both forms of love, the hardest kind, the kind that costs you everything but leaves you whole. I look toward the garden one last time before night settles in. The roses are closing for the evening, their petals heavy with dew. If this story moved you, please share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about navigating family life and finding your voice. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your achievements deserve to be celebrated, even if you sometimes have to cheer yourself up the most. Love isn't proven by money, or gifts, or promises. It's proven by how we protect each other when no one is watching. And if you believe stories like this can open hearts, share this one, so someone out there might find the courage to speak, forgive, or finally seek the truth.